Have you ever felt trapped in a spiral of self-criticism where nothing seems good enough? This self-hatred, fueled by external standards and expectations that seem unattainable, can prevent us from living fully. But what if the problem lies precisely in the importance we give to that inner voice? Today, we're going to explore how to break this cycle and build a lighter, more positive relationship with ourselves. Self-hatred often stems from a deeply rooted feeling of inadequacy, which may be subtle at first, but develops over time, fed by external and internal expectations. Imagine a child who grows up hearing constant criticism or fails to meet certain standards set around them. This quiet cycle of self-devaluation gradually becomes an invisible enemy, an inner voice that always reminds you of what's lacking, what's not good enough. This is the beginning of a difficult-to-break spiral that strengthens over time. In adolescence, these roots deepen, driven by the need for social acceptance and the desire to belong. All it takes is one negative experience, like being ridiculed or excluded, for the idea of "I'm not enough" to gain strength. These episodes shape how a person sees themselves, turning momentary failures into permanent traits. The problem is that, when left untreated, these feelings of inadequacy stay, becoming almost part of one's personality. As a person grows older, self-criticism becomes even more firmly established, often without them realizing it. They begin to believe that past mistakes define their future and that negative experiences are almost deserved. It's a vicious mental cycle that perpetuates itself. For instance, a person who has been unsuccessful in a job may internalize this experience as proof of incompetence, overlooking the skills they have and the qualities that set them apart. This self-hatred, fueled by specific episodes, is also fed by constant comparisons that only reinforce the idea of insufficiency. It's like trying to run on a treadmill that never stops speeding up, where there's always someone faster, more successful, more attractive. And the impact of this is powerful. Even small failures become sources of shame, a shame that isn't always shared but corrodes silently. For those who want to combat this cycle, it's possible to start transforming the view of oneself through small acts. Try a simple exercise. Every day, write down at least one positive thing about yourself or something you've done. It may seem like little, but the constant practice of this recognition shifts the focus to positive aspects, and the mind begins to reorganize around these perceptions. These small but intentional steps plant the seeds for a more solid self-esteem. Another important aspect of understanding the origin of self-hatred lies in family comparisons and the pressure to meet others' standards. Often, we're expected to follow certain paths or reach goals that don't always reflect who we are. Imagine, for example, someone who grew up hearing they should follow in their parents' footsteps. When this person decides to take another path, the feeling of guilt arises, as if it were a betrayal. These family dynamics have a direct impact on how we interpret our own failures and successes. In the end, fighting self-hatred is a matter of understanding and patience with oneself, rediscovering that failures and challenges are part of the human experience and not proof of inadequacy. It's a process, and no one needs to change overnight. After all, who hasn't felt insufficient at some point? But this feeling doesn't need to define who we are. During today's video, along with the main topics, I want to share something that's made a difference for me. Recently, I started using CineBoost, which has helped me improve focus, energy, and even reduce daily anxiety. If you want to know more, check out the pinned comment. And the best part is, you only pay for shipping. Self-criticism is a natural process, a tool we use to assess our actions and seek improvement. But when this inner voice becomes negative and punitive, it ceases to be an ally and becomes a source of suffering. This is the trap of excessive self-criticism. Instead of encouraging growth, it weakens self-esteem and creates a distorted view of oneself. How many times do we find ourselves reliving small mistakes, turning them into proof of deep flaws? This is the logic of self-sabotage, which only grows over time. When caught in this cycle, even minor setbacks seem disproportionately important. A criticism at work, a misunderstanding with friends, or even a casual comment can trigger a wave of negative thoughts. These repetitive and harsh thoughts become more intense and start to shape how a person sees themselves. What should have been constructive reflection becomes a flood of judgments, of "I should have done this," or "I'm not good enough." What many don't realize is that by giving so much value to failures, they lose sight of the bigger picture. A failure doesn't define a person, just as a mistake doesn't cancel out successes. Still, the cycle of self-criticism blinds us to this, as if we're using a magnifying glass focused only on flaws. Think of someone who avoids opportunities for fear of making mistakes. This fear isn't rational, but a product of accumulated and inflated self-criticism. To reduce the intensity of this cycle, a useful technique is positive self-reflection. At the end of the day, instead of only thinking about what could have been better, spend a few minutes recalling small accomplishments. It could be something simple, like completing a task or being kind to someone. This regular exercise helps neutralize the impact of criticism and brings a more balanced view of oneself. It's also important to recognize that extreme self-criticism often reflects external expectations. We live in an era where perfection is exalted and failures are looked down upon. Asking yourself how much of your self-criticism really stems from a personal need or is the result of social pressures is already an important step in weakening this cycle. Remember, no one is free from mistakes, but some people learn from them rather than sinking into them. For those who feel this cycle is very intense, practicing gratitude might help soften self-criticism. Try making a list of things you did well, things you're grateful for. By bringing these aspects to awareness, you shift the focus away from failures and recognize the values you hold. In the long term, this strengthens a more positive inner image and helps break the rigidity of self-criticism. In the end, accepting that we all go through phases and that it's human to make mistakes is essential. We're all imperfect, and that's okay. And before moving on to the next point, subscribe to our channel to keep exploring topics like this and understand even more about how we can be our own best allies. Modern society's expectations can be a heavy burden, shaping the way people see themselves and often distorting their perceptions of what's truly important. In a world that values achievements and accomplishments, many feel constant pressure to fit in, to be successful, and to match the ideal of a winner. Faced with these expectations, it's easy to feel inadequate, as if any step off the path is a reason for failure. Ironically, this feeling of inadequacy doesn't choose its victims. It affects both those just starting out and those who've achieved much, because the finish line never seems within reach. Comparison is another invisible but very present trap. We see others' achievements, but rarely the sacrifices and challenges they faced. Society promotes a narrative where success is absolute and failure personal. So, when someone faces a setback, the feeling arises that they weren't good enough, when in fact, each journey is unique. It's like looking at an iceberg. We only see what's visible, but what supports that achievement remains hidden. For those struggling with the weight of these expectations, a practical exercise is to redefine what success means. It may be helpful to set personal and authentic goals instead of following only what's considered valuable by others. Here's an example. Rather than measuring success by salary or title, How about valuing the experiences and relationships that nurture personal growth? Building your own definition of success is a powerful step toward breaking the comparison cycle and finding satisfaction in individual achievements. These external pressures also cause many to end up neglecting their own needs and desires. In pursuit of approval and recognition, they forget to question whether what they're chasing truly makes them happy. Imagine someone who chooses a career solely for status, but feels drained and unmotivated. Over time, this internal disconnection can lead to a deep sense of frustration. Re-examining your purpose and asking what really matters is an exercise that can help reconnect. Another tip is to practice detachment from external validations. It's natural to want recognition, but relying on it is dangerous. Cultivating the habit of self-praise and recognizing one's own achievements is an effective way to build more solid self-esteem, independent of others' opinions. For example, instead of always seeking compliments at work, set small goals and celebrate when you reach them, regardless of what others think. When we accept that our journey is unique and that no one lives under the same circumstances, the weight of others' expectations begins to lose its grip. Comparison becomes less intense, and we start to appreciate our own progress more. After all, modern society places a lot of emphasis on speed and results, but rarely values the journey and the learning that each challenge brings. Yes, it generates anxiety, but peace can be found on this path. At heart, questioning societal values reveals that there's a difference between the success the world expects and the success that makes sense for each individual. This freedom to redefine priorities brings relief from the weight of external expectations. And the journey continues, where the next step is understanding how physical appearance and beauty standards contribute to self-hatred. The impact of appearance on self-esteem is a phenomenon that affects most people. At some point, in a society where image is exalted and beauty standards are nearly unattainable, it's common for many to feel inadequate for not fitting the mold. This constant pressure leads to severe self-criticism, especially because appearance is one of the first things noticed. The situation worsens when this bias, known as lookism, becomes a factor of exclusion and even discrimination, generating feelings of inferiority and even self-hatred. This problem isn't limited to what's seen in the mirror. It's reinforced by a constant cycle of comparisons. With the rise of social media, we're bombarded with idealized images where imperfections are often carefully hidden. Think of someone who, while scrolling through their feed, sees only perfect faces and bodies. This repeated exposure creates the illusion that these appearances are the norm, and anyone who doesn't fit starts to feel insufficient. It's an unfair game where reality is disguised by filters and edits. For those wanting to reduce this negative impact, a good exercise is to limit time on social media, and more importantly, follow profiles that promote a more realistic view of appearance. Many influencers today share unretouched photos, showing that they too have imperfections. This type of content helps break the illusion and re-educates the gaze, reminding us that beauty isn't restricted to a specific standard. Instead of seeking the ideal body or face, value the features that make you unique. Another important aspect is recognizing that appearance is just one part of identity. By focusing solely on looks, we overlook valuable qualities like empathy, intelligence, and humor. A good practice is to periodically list your inner qualities and personal achievements. This isn't just an exercise in self-esteem, but a reminder that someone's worth goes far beyond what meets the eye. After all, what matters in the long run is the impact you have on the world and those around you. For those who feel the aesthetic pressure is too intense, another option is to invest in self-knowledge. Try asking yourself, what really matters to me? Often, the pressure to look a certain way is something we've absorbed from the outside, but in practice, it has little impact on our happiness. Therapy, support groups, or even mindfulness practices can help rebalance this perception and strengthen what lies beyond appearance. Remembering that beauty is a culturally constructed concept is essential for relieving this pressure. In different periods and places, various standards have been considered ideal. This shows that what's seen as beautiful today may change tomorrow. Realizing this, the need to conform to an aesthetic ideal loses some of its power, becoming something temporary and not definitive for self-worth. The path to accepting one's appearance, therefore, involves deconstructing these ideals and valuing authenticity. In the end, true beauty is revealed in the comfort one feels with themselves, not in others' acceptance. And by adopting this perspective, we move with more lightness to the next step, understanding how philosophy can help us accept what we cannot control. Philosophy offers us a way of looking at life that goes beyond appearances and superficial successes, showing that peace can be found by accepting what we can't control. This perspective, prominent in Stoicism, teaches us that the pursuit of external happiness often pulls us away from true satisfaction. Instead, by accepting life as it is and ourselves as we are, we can free ourselves from pressures that have no lasting impact on our well-being. After all, happiness based solely on external achievements is fragile and fleeting. Stoicism suggests that to find peace, it's essential to distinguish between what's within our control and what isn't. For example, others' opinions or external events are elements beyond our control, and clinging to them only creates anxiety and frustration. What's truly within our control is how we respond to these events. By practicing this, one develops greater resilience, learning to face challenges without allowing them to define their self-esteem or happiness. Another important aspect of this philosophy is the concept of inner value. Instead of worrying so much about others' opinions, Stoics propose focusing on building a solid moral foundation and acting according to one's own principles. For someone seeking to strengthen themselves against external pressures, it might be helpful to adopt small habits that promote self-awareness, like writing in a journal about what you've learned each day. This daily exercise reinforces a more balanced view of life and promotes an internal foundation that doesn't depend on approvals or criticisms. Acceptance doesn't mean resignation or lack of ambition. On the contrary, it means understanding that everyone has their own rhythm and path, and that success isn't synonymous with perfection. Imagine a situation where, despite efforts, something doesn't turn out as expected. Instead of seeing it as a failure, Stoicism encourages us to see the lessons behind the event, transforming a potentially negative experience into a growth opportunity. To apply this philosophy, a recommended practice is negative visualization. Daily, set aside a few minutes to imagine an undesired situation occurring. This isn't to attract pessimism, but to prepare the mind and reduce emotional impact if something goes wrong. Over time, this practice strengthens emotional resilience and helps cope with frustrations more calmly and maturely. Remembering that personal value goes beyond achievements is another important key. After all, we are more than our momentary successes or failures. What remains are the principles we cultivate and the positive impact we generate around us. With this view, a person starts to seek satisfaction in what is lasting rather than getting lost in the constant pursuit of external recognition. And thus, by adopting this philosophy of acceptance, a gradual transformation takes place. A person learns to navigate life with less resistance and more serenity, recognizing that they don't need to be in constant competition. And the journey we began with self-hatred now reaches a point of inner renewal, with new tools to handle external pressures and move forward with greater ease. We've reached the end of this journey, but now it's up to you. Small changes lead to big transformations, so how about taking a step toward a more positive relationship with yourself? Keep watching the recommended video on the screen to delve even deeper into this topic. And if you enjoyed it, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss more content like this. Leave a comment. What will you start applying from now on?